A girl named Hallie arrives at a summer camp for girls and quickly makes friends. She tells them about her life in California, where she lives with her dad, whom she describes as her best friend. She also mentions that they own a vineyard. Later on, Annie arrives at camp from London in a limousine with her butler, Martin. After making sure she has everything she needs, they do their special handshake and say goodbye. Later, Hallie competes in a fencing match and becomes the champion. The instructor asks if anyone wants to challenge her, and Annie steps up. They engage in a fierce duel, and in the end, Annie wins, knocking Hallie into the pool. Hallie doesn't take it well, and as Annie tries to help her out, Hallie pulls her into the water too. Everyone laughs, and the instructor tells them to shake hands after the match. When they remove their masks, everyone is shocked to see that they look exactly alike. Still upset about losing, Hallie mocks Annie, claiming they don't look alike and that she's the prettier one. Before they can argue further, the instructor intervenes and dismisses everyone. That night, Annie wins at poker in her cabin. Hallie barges in and challenges her to a game, agreeing that the loser must jump into the lake. Though Annie seems confident, Hallie wins, and Annie jumps into the lake while Hallie steals her clothes as a prank. The next morning, Annie gets her revenge by moving Hallie's bed onto the roof. Hallie retaliates by rigging Annie's cabin with pranks, including a water balloon that bursts over her head. 2 camp counselors arrive for a surprise inspection. Hallie tries to warn them, but they enter anyway and trigger all the traps. As punishment, Annie and Hallie are sent to the isolation cabin. At first, they keep bickering, but they slowly bond when Annie helps Hallie close the windows during a storm. While talking, Hallie mentions that she lives with her dad at their vineyard in California, and Annie says she lives with her mom, a successful fashion designer, in London. They realize they both have divorced parents and share the same birthday, which seems like quite the coincidence. Later, Annie asks Hallie about her mom, and Hallie admits she's never met her, but has a photo her dad gave her. Annie reveals she's never met her dad either, and also has a torn photograph. When they compare their pictures, they realize they're twins, with the same parents and matching necklaces, and they hug, overwhelmed. That night, while talking about how neither of their parents remarried after the divorce, Hallie comes up with an idea. Instead of going back to their respective homes, she suggests they switch places. Hallie wants to meet her mom, and Annie wants to meet her dad, and they could even use the opportunity to bring their parents back together. Although it's risky, Annie agrees, and they start sharing every detail about their parents and daily lives. Annie cuts her hair and pierces her ears to look more like Hallie, while Hallie practices Annie's British accent and learns about her grandfather and Martin. When camp ends, they're ready. Annie heads to California and Hallie to London. They promise to stay in touch and find the perfect moment to reunite their parents. At first glance, it seems like a fun story about 2 long-lost twins who stumble upon each other and hatch a plan to bring their parents back together. But if you look a little closer, it's a lot less cheerful. It's about 2 parents who decided to separate their daughters and lie to them their entire lives, just to avoid facing each other. In trying to escape their own conflicts and resentments, these parents completely disregarded the emotional well-being of their daughters. They didn't think about what it would mean for them to grow up, never knowing they had a sister, or about the impact of growing up missing either a mother or a father. They simply chose to deny them the chance to share a childhood together, to lean on each other, to experience life as sisters, just so they wouldn't have to deal with each other. Unfortunately, this attitude isn't as rare as we'd like to believe. It reflects a pattern we often see: parents who, caught up in their own issues, put their children's emotional needs second. In difficult divorces, kids often end up absorbing the unresolved pain of the adults around them. And without realizing it, the parents' choices leave lasting scars. Meanwhile, Hallie leaves camp in Annie's place, heading to the airport. On the plane, she's anxious but excited to finally meet her mother. When she arrives in London, Martin, the family's butler, greets her warmly, believing she's Annie. Hallie pulls off Annie's usual handshake with Martin, who notices her shorter hair and slightly different look, but she quickly explains it away as a new style she wanted to try. Soon they arrive at the house, and Hallie can barely contain her excitement about seeing her mom. She rushes to her grandfather first, hugging him tightly and saying how much she missed him. Just then, Elizabeth calls for her daughter, and Hallie runs into her arms, starting to cry and saying she's waited her whole life for this moment. Elizabeth, touched but puzzled by Hallie's emotional reaction and her new look, comments on the hair and the earrings. Hallie brushes it off, saying she just wanted to change. Later, as they catch up, Elizabeth talks about how fun camp must have been. The phone rings, and Elizabeth learns she's needed for a photo shoot, inviting Hallie to come along. Hallie discovers that her mother is a fashion designer. When she sees a stunning wedding dress, she's amazed by her mom's talent and even jokes that the dress would look great on her. After a fun day at the studio, where Hallie even participates in a photo shoot, they head home. On the way back, Hallie asks about her dad, catching Elizabeth off guard. At first, Elizabeth avoids the topic, but Hallie gently insists, and Elizabeth finally opens up. She remembers Nick fondly, saying he was charming when they met on the Queen Elizabeth II cruise ship, traveling from London to New York. When the twins discovered they were sisters, their first instinct was to reunite their parents. From their perspective, it all seemed simple. If they had found each other and were so happy, why couldn't their parents do the same and be a family again? This idealization has a lot to do with the fact that the girls grew up without knowing anything about their parents' relationship or why they separated. Without that information, they see the separation as something that can easily be fixed, just like they fixed things by finding each other. They don't understand, because no one ever told them, that their parents have spent 11 years avoiding each other completely, going so far as to lie to their own daughters just to keep their distance. The separation was clearly serious, but their parents' lack of transparency fuels the girls' fantasy that a simple reunion could fix everything. The movie gives us the impression that everything could end like a fairy tale with a happily ever after, but in reality, it's much more complicated. Especially when there's years of resentment and unresolved issues between two people, putting the family back together isn't always the best or even the healthiest solution. Meanwhile, Annie arrives in California and reunites with her father, Nick, who picks her up at the airport. She's thrilled to see him, and after a big hug, they drive home. On the way, Nick notices that Annie has developed a British accent. She quickly explains that she picked it up at camp. Nick also comments on how she keeps saying "dad" over and over, and Annie replies that she's been waiting a long time to say it, although she then clarifies that she just missed him during the 2 months she was away at camp. Nick laughs it off, and they soon arrive at home. There, Annie meets Chessie, Hallie's longtime nanny. Chessie immediately notices something seems different about her, but can't quite put her finger on it. Then she's surprised when the family dog starts barking at Annie. Inside the house, Nick tells Annie he wants her to meet someone once she unpacks. That's when Annie sees a woman casually sipping a drink with Nick. While Annie unpacks with Chessie, she asks about the woman. Chessie explains that her name is Meredith, a publicist Nick hired to promote the vineyard. But Chessie clearly suspects that Meredith has other intentions. Later that day, Nick introduces Annie to Meredith. Annie tries to intimidate Meredith, and when they're alone, Annie tells her that Nick isn't really into her and that he dates a lot of women. Meredith catches on to Annie's attempt to sabotage her, but brushes it off with a smile. When Annie gets home, she sneaks into a closet to call Hallie. Hallie answers, hiding on her end too. Annie tells her all about Meredith and urges Hallie to hurry up with their plan. Hallie, wanting more time to get to know Elizabeth, pretends the connection is bad and hangs up. Later, while out riding horses with Nick, Annie asks him about her mother, catching him off guard. Before he can answer, Meredith and her assistant, Richard, show up. Meredith brings up the wedding plans, asking if Nick has told Annie yet. Nick admits he's still working on breaking the news. As Meredith and Richard walk away, Meredith privately tells Richard her real plan. After marrying Nick, she intends to ship Annie off to boarding school and take control of Nick's fortune. It's interesting how the movie subtly shows that while Nick and Elizabeth are highly successful in their careers, this likely contributed to them being somewhat absent as parents. Chessie and Martin, the staff, are the ones who seem to know the girls best. They are the first to notice something is off when Hallie and Annie try to impersonate each other. Nick and Elizabeth, absorbed in their own busy lives, seem to have overlooked the most important responsibility they had, truly caring for their daughter's emotional well-being. While the movie doesn't explicitly dive into the psychological impact of growing up with one absent parent and a largely distracted one, it's something we can easily infer. The overwhelming emotions the girls feel when they discover each other and when they finally meet the missing parent speak volumes. Even though they were surrounded by loving people like Chessie and Martin, that affection couldn't completely fill the void left by the missing parent. It's not hard to imagine how they might have grown up with a lingering sense of loneliness, feeling that something important was missing from their lives. Watching their friends live with both parents probably made them feel that absence even more deeply. Deep down, they must have always longed for that missing connection, for the part of their family that was taken from them because their parents chose to prioritize their own issues over their daughter's emotional needs. Later on, Nick takes Annie to visit the vineyard and asks her what she thinks of Meredith. Annie doesn't give a clear answer and instead rides off on a horse. Back at the house, she worries that Meredith could ruin their plan to reunite their parents. Chessie overhears part of the conversation and demands an explanation. That's when Annie confesses that she's not Hallie. She's Annie. Chessie, overcome with emotion, pulls her into a hug. Nick walks in, surprised to see Chessie crying. She tells him everything's fine and heads to the kitchen to whip up a special meal for Annie. Left alone with Nick, Annie tries to warn him. Nick confesses that he's planning to marry Meredith. Annie, in shock, blurts out something in French, leaving Nick baffled. When he asks what's going on, Annie quickly claims she learned it at camp, and then, not knowing what else to say, tells Nick he absolutely cannot marry Meredith and runs out of the house. Meredith returns home, and Nick mentions that Annie is upset about the news. Meredith tries to talk to Annie, but gets angry when the girl insists that she doesn't love Nick and accuses her of only being after his money. Furious, Meredith warns Annie that she can't stop the wedding. Soon after, Annie sends a fax to Hallie explaining that things are not going well. Martin sees it first and almost throws it away, but Hallie rescues it and calls Annie. Annie explains the situation and begs Hallie to tell Elizabeth about their plan before Nick marries Meredith. Hallie agrees, but her grandfather overhears the call and asks for an explanation. Hallie tells him everything, and that night, he encourages her to talk to Elizabeth. Nervous but determined, Hallie finally does it. Elizabeth, shocked but happy to see her daughter, explains that after the divorce, they separated the girls. Hallie asks if she can go to California to see her dad and sister, and Elizabeth agrees. While packing, Elizabeth gets nervous, unsure of what to wear because deep down, she still has feelings for Nick and wants to look good. To calm her, Hallie lies and says her father is eager to see her. Elizabeth and Hallie leave London with Martin and arrive at the same hotel where Nick, Meredith, and Annie are preparing for the wedding. While looking for her room, Elizabeth spots Nick with Meredith and realizes he wasn't expecting her. Elizabeth finds Hallie with Annie and Chessie. When she realizes she's been tricked into seeing Nick, she complains, but the girls admit they did it to stop him from marrying Meredith. Elizabeth insists she's not interested and tells them to let Nick know she only came to swap the girls back. At the hotel restaurant, while Elizabeth is there, Meredith spots her and recognizes her as a famous wedding dress designer. Unaware that Elizabeth is Nick's ex-wife, Meredith asks her to design her wedding dress. Later that day, Nick searches all over the hotel for Elizabeth and accidentally falls into the pool. When he climbs out, dripping wet, he finally sees her. Before they can talk, Hallie and Annie explain how they planned everything from the moment they met at camp. Nick, thrilled to have Annie with him, hugs her tightly. Elizabeth then asks to speak with Nick alone. But just then, Meredith walks in and is shocked to see her dress designer with her fiancé. Before Nick can explain, Hallie and Annie reveal the truth. They're twins, and Elizabeth is their mother. Meredith, trying to stay composed, hides her anger. That night, Hallie and Annie, with their grandfather's help, organize a romantic dinner for their parents on a yacht, recreating the night they met. Chessie and Martin pose as waiters to set the mood. During dinner, Elizabeth realizes Nick fulfilled his dream of owning a vineyard. Nick notices that Elizabeth, who used to doodle on napkins and newspapers, has become a famous designer. They both achieved their dreams. Talking about their daughters, Elizabeth suggests splitting custody, 6 months each. Nick hesitates. Elizabeth admits she thought they separated the girls just to avoid seeing each other again. Nick asks her why she left, and she says she hoped he would stop her. Nick confesses he didn't know she wanted that. But Elizabeth says it doesn't matter anymore, since he's with someone else. The next day, Nick and Elizabeth prepare to leave the hotel and go their separate ways with the girls. But Hallie and Annie refuse to go unless they first take a camping trip together as a family. Reluctantly, the parents agree. At the last minute, Elizabeth backs out, suggesting that Meredith should go instead, since she's going to marry Nick anyway. The girls are horrified, but they have no choice. The camping trip turns into a nightmare for Meredith. The girls load her backpack with rocks, put a lizard in her hair, and later roll her cot into a lake while she's sleeping. When she wakes up in the water, furious, she demands Nick choose between her and the girls. Nick chooses his daughters. An enraged Meredith storms off. Nick and the girls return home. That night, Nick takes Elizabeth down to the wine cellar and shows her a special bottle from their wedding. He tries to kiss her, but Elizabeth pulls away, saying she doesn't believe it would work out. The next morning, Elizabeth leaves for London with Annie. When they arrive home, Elizabeth is shocked to find Hallie waiting for her. Hallie explains that she and Nick took the Concorde, the supersonic jet that got them there in half the time. Nick appears and tells Elizabeth that this time he won't make the mistake of letting her go. He kisses her passionately. The girls are thrilled. Their plan worked. Soon after, Nick and Elizabeth get married again, and the family is finally reunited. In the movie, everything resolves perfectly, ending with a happy fairy tale ending. But in real life, a separation lasting over a decade, filled with resentment and old wounds, rarely ends this smoothly. If things hadn't worked out, the emotional toll on the twins could have been devastating, leaving them disillusioned or even guilty for not being able to fix their family. While the movie's ending is comforting, it's important to remember that in reality, reuniting a family isn't always the best, or only, solution. Sometimes it's better for parents to stay separated but emotionally present, rather than staying together in a home full of tension and unhappiness. In tough situations, it's common for parents to try to shield their kids from the truth, thinking it will protect them from pain. But withholding important information can actually hurt them more. Children are much more perceptive than adults often realize. Even if things aren't said out loud, they pick up on tension, on silences, on emotions left unspoken. Parents must understand that being honest, even when it's uncomfortable, is crucial for their children's emotional development. It doesn't mean exposing kids to every harsh detail, but it does mean telling them the truths that directly affect their lives in ways they can understand. Hiding the truth doesn't protect children. It leaves them unprepared to make sense of their world. Honesty helps them build trust in their parents. It shows them that even when life is complicated or painful, they can rely on the truth. And that trust is essential for a healthy, strong parent-child relationship. To close this analysis, I want to leave one final thought. Children deserve respect, to be listened to, and, most importantly, to be informed about the decisions that shape their lives. There is no decision more important than the one that impacts their emotional well-being. As we see in the movie, lies and omissions, even when made with good intentions, can have lasting, painful consequences. Children deserve more than to be spectators of adult decisions. They deserve to be treated with care, honesty, and the dignity to understand the world they're growing up in, supported by the parents who love them.